He lost the role of a lifetime not once, but twice. A network clause stole it the first time. A breaking voice on the phone took it the second. Most actors never recover from that kind of rejection. But lately, Pierce Brosnan has been showing up in places people did not expect. A bald cap and a prosthetic nose. A part so far from Bond that fans barely recognized him. Something is shifting, and the whispers are not all flattering. Why now? What changed? And why does the man they cast aside suddenly look like the one having the last word? The answer is not simple, and it is not clean. It sits somewhere between grief, reinvention, and the cold machinery of an industry that has never been kind to aging leading men. Brosnan is 73 years old now. He has lived through more loss than most people could carry. He has been fired from the role that made him a global icon. He has buried a wife and a daughter with the same disease. He has spent years working steadily while the culture moved on without him. And yet, in the spring of 2025, he appeared in a crime series that pulled in more than 26 million viewers worldwide. That is not the trajectory of a man fading away. That is the shape of a comeback built on something deeper than charm. To understand how he got here, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to the tuxedo or the Aston Martin, but to a childhood marked by absence. Pierce Brosnan was born in Drogheda, County Louth, Ireland, in May 1953. His father left when he was an infant. His mother, Kathleen, moved to England for work when he was still very young, as many Irish mothers of that era had to do. He was raised by relatives in Navan, County Meath. He saw her only on rare visits. For much of his childhood, home meant living in other people's houses. That part of his story rarely comes up when people talk about the polished, charming man in the dinner jacket. But it shaped him in ways that only became visible much later. As a teenager, he moved to London. He trained at the Drama Centre and slowly built a life for himself as an actor. It took time, but by the early 1980s, he had found the role that changed everything. On television, he played the smooth American detective Remington Steele, beginning in 1982. The part made him recognizable. He had charm, confidence, and exactly the kind of screen presence that could hold together a major franchise. Bond producers noticed. Then in 1986, with Roger Moore stepping away, they began looking for a new 007. All signs pointed to Pierce Brosnan. He flew to the United Kingdom. He did a screen test. He had a costume fitting. He even stood in front of the 007 stage at Pinewood Studios. By almost every account, the role was already his. The producers had made their choice. The industry press was already reporting it. Everything was moving forward. Then everything changed at the last possible moment. Once the news spread that Brosnan was being linked to Bond, the ratings for Remington Steele suddenly rose. NBC had been ready to cancel the show, but the network still had a contractual right to change its mind within 60 days. So that is exactly what it did. The cancellation was reversed. Brosnan was pulled back to the series, and the Bond role went instead to Timothy Dalton. Years later, Brosnan described it as a terrible blow. The language is careful there, almost restrained. But you can hear the weight in it. A terrible blow. Not a disappointment. Not a setback. A blow. The late 1980s and early 1990s became a strange stretch in his career. He was respected. He was working. He appeared in solid films and gave good performances, yet nothing quite defined him. He played the villain in The Fourth Protocol. He showed up in Mrs. Doubtfire as the handsome, polished husband opposite Robin Williams. The work was steady, and some of it was memorable, but none of it made the industry stop and look at him in a new way. He was talented, he was charming, and he was professionally reliable. In Hollywood terms, that can sometimes be enough to keep you employed. It is rarely enough to make you essential. During those years, there was always the sense that he was waiting for something. Not just any role, but the right role. The role that would let him show what he could really do. For most actors, that opportunity comes early, or it never comes at all. The industry moves quickly, and attention spans are short. If you miss your moment, the machine usually moves on without you. But Brosnan was different in one crucial way. He had already proven he could carry a franchise. The producers had already chosen him once. So when Bond came back around, when the timing finally aligned, he was still there. Still waiting. Still ready. In 1995, when GoldenEye finally arrived, Brosnan was 42 years old. 9 years had passed since he first lost the role. 9 years of solid work, steady employment, and the quiet knowledge that he had been chosen once and could be chosen again. The film earned more than $352 million worldwide and became, at that point, the most successful Bond film ever made. He stepped into the role as if it had been waiting for him all along. Critics responded well. Audiences turned up in huge numbers. After nearly a decade of professional limbo, he was exactly where he belonged. From 1995 to 2002, Pierce Brosnan played James Bond across 4 films. He wore the tuxedo, drove the Aston Martin, and delivered that raised eyebrow so naturally that it almost looked effortless. First came GoldenEye in 1995. Then Tomorrow Never Dies in 1997, The World Is Not Enough in 1999, and Die Another Day in 2002. Over those 7 years, the box office kept saying one thing while the reviews were slowly beginning to say something else. At the time of its release, Die Another Day became the highest-grossing Bond film in the franchise's history, pulling in $431.9 million worldwide. For 2002, that was a massive number. The film was designed as a 40th anniversary celebration of Bond itself, filled with callbacks, references, and moments that felt like an event. And it was an event. Still, the excitement around it could not fully hide the growing discomfort with where Bond had gone. Reviews were mixed. The computer graphics already felt shaky. The plot involved DNA swapping and invisible cars, and for many people, that pushed the series too far into science fiction territory. Today, the film sits at 55% on Rotten Tomatoes, the lowest critical score of Brosnan's entire Bond run. At the same time, his salary had risen with every film. He earned $4 million for GoldenEye, then $8.2 million for Tomorrow Never Dies, $12.4 million for The World Is Not Enough, and finally $16.5 million for Die Another Day. Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson, the franchise producers, had spoken warmly about a 5th film. Brosnan went through the publicity tour for Die Another Day, believing he still had one more Bond film ahead of him. But the industry was changing around him in ways he could not see. Then came the phone call. He was in the Bahamas working on another movie when his agents reached him. Negotiations had stopped. Broccoli and Wilson wanted to speak with him directly. Brosnan later recalled sitting in Richard Harris's house in the Bahamas when Barbara Broccoli came on the line, her voice breaking as she told him they were sorry. Then Michael Wilson spoke in a calm, formal tone and thanked him for being a great James Bond. Brosnan said later that he was utterly shocked. He said he felt kicked to the curb by the way it happened. By October 2004, he confirmed publicly that it was over. Then in October 2005, Daniel Craig was introduced as the new Bond. So the role had been taken from Brosnan twice in his life. The first time it disappeared because a television network used a contractual clause. The second time it ended with a phone call in the Bahamas. He was 51 years old then, and he had to decide what came next. The problem with losing Bond is not just professional. It is personal. After years of being polished, controlled, dangerous, and charming, the image hardens around you. Audiences keep seeing the tuxedo long after you have taken it off. Every later role gets judged against that version of you. What most people did not know at the time was that Brosnan was carrying something much heavier than professional disappointment. In December 1991, he had lost his first wife, Cassandra Harris, to ovarian cancer. She was only 43 years old. They had been married for 11 years, and heartbreakingly, she died the day after their wedding anniversary. Cassandra had been an Australian actress, and years before Brosnan ever stepped into the role of Bond, she had already appeared in that world herself. She played Countess Lisa Lynn for Your Eyes Only. That film became part of their story in another way, because it was on that set that they met. When Cassandra and Brosnan married, She already had 2 children from a previous relationship, Charlotte and Christopher. After their biological father, Dermot Harris, died of a heart attack in 1986, Brosnan adopted both of them and raised them as his own. He and Cassandra also had a son together, Sean, who was born in 1983. So by the time tragedy entered their home, they had built a full family life together. Cassandra had been diagnosed with cancer in 1987, and for 4 years she fought it with everything she had. There were 8 surgeries. There was chemotherapy again and again. Through all of it, Brosnan stayed beside her. Later he spoke about holding her hand at the end. He spoke about the incredible cruelty of losing her. He also said that she was the person who made him the man, the actor, and the father he became. That tells you how deep the loss went. This was not only the death of a wife. It was the loss of the person who had shaped the center of his life. Then years later, the same grief returned in a way that almost feels impossible to bear. In June 2013, Brosnan's daughter Charlotte died of the same disease. She was 41 years old and had been fighting it for 3 years. She died on June 28, 2013, surrounded by her husband, her children, and her brothers. It was the same illness. It took both mother and daughter. Brosnan had already seen what ovarian cancer could do, and then he had to watch it strike his family again. He has spoken about living with what he once called a dark, melancholy Irish black dog beside him. The phrase says a lot because it does not sound like the language of someone passing through sadness for a season. It sounds like someone who has learned that grief stays close and that life goes on with it still there. Over time, Brosnan turned that pain into action. He became a public advocate for ovarian cancer research. He spoke at events, supported awareness campaigns, and used his voice to push for funding and attention. So when people look at his recent work and whisper that something is not right, they are missing the point entirely. In the spring of 2025, he appeared in Mobland, a crime series created by Ronan Bennett and produced by Guy Ritchie. The show reached more than 26 million viewers worldwide and was renewed for a second season within 3 weeks of the finale. At 73, he is not fading away. He is not desperately chasing relevance. He is doing what he has always done. He is carrying the weight of real loss, real experience, and real understanding of what matters. And that weight, that depth, that refusal to pretend life is lighter than it actually is, that is exactly what makes his current work so powerful. The whispers are wrong. This is not a man falling apart. This is a man who has learned how to build something meaningful from pieces.